Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make some placemats. I took some of my scraps and I sewed them together, and I've got a nice pattern going here. Of course, these colors aren't what I'm going to use, but this is the pattern I'm going to use. And I did some numbers here, and I figured this out so we can make 4 placemats from 20 jelly roll strips. Now, Hoffman Fabrics, they have a product called a Bali Poppy. It's basically half a jelly roll, so it has 20 strips in it. So that's perfect for our placemats, and we just got in a nice big shipment from them, and somewhere in these boxes there's several colors of Bali Poppies. So let's open them up and find a good color. All right, here's some. It's very pretty, but I need something more colorful. Oh, this one, that will be perfect. Now this is exactly the number of strips we need to make the 4 placemats. We could get another pack if we want to make a matching table runner, but for now we're just going to make this. And we need to get a backing fabric. Now this group of strips, it has so many different colors in it that I'm looking at our batik wall thinking I could use almost anything to match this. So if I want to make them look a little bit more blue, now this is just on the back side. It's not going to show from the top, but that would make a nice backing. Maybe I want to make them very, very gold. This is just a dotted, almost solid. That would be nice and bright. I could even get something with flowers on it like that. I think I like that. It has kind of a tropical feel to it. That will be perfect. Now let's go ahead and open this up and get the strips out. Now this project is going to use all 20 strips, so there's basically going to be no waste at all. Now let's see. These are nice and flat. You may need to iron your strips. It just depends when you open it up if they feel nice and flat, and these do. So I'm going to take 4 strips at a time, and I'm going to put them on my cutting board because that'll give me 8 layers here, and I'm comfortable cutting 8 layers. Now you don't ever want to cut more layers than you are comfortable cutting because they won't be accurate. But with these thin batiks, 8 will work for me. So I'm going to get them all lined up onto the cutting board, and I can cut them all at the same time. Now they're all lined up and they're all straight on my cutting board. So I'm going to use my plastic ruler here, and I'm going to add my hand weight. I've got a 5-pound hand weight, and that helps hold my ruler down. And I'm going to subcut everything into 5-inch pieces. So now we are going to have 4 sections here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 stacks of cut pieces. So all of these, that's going to make 1 placemat. There's a placemat, there's a placemat, there's a placemat, there's a placemat. So this is all the leftover pieces. This is all the scraps we have. Now when we make the blocks, we're going to get a few triangles also. But what I like to do with these is mix them in with some batting and use them when I make pin cushions or small cushions. Now I'm going to lay the pieces out in 4 rows with 10 in each row. Now since the jelly roll is made of a folded strip of fabric, they're in pairs, and that's good because that's what I want. Now my second row, it's also going to be in pairs, but I've moved it down 1 position so that these pairs are not lined up with the pairs that are in the first row. Now this last pair, I'm just going to put 1 on each end. Now I'm going to start the 3rd row, and I'm going to start with a pair and keep going down. So there's the 3rd row. Now for the 4th row, again, I'm going to start 1 down, and then with my very last pair, I'm going to put 1 on each end. Now that I've got it in a rough layout here, I may trade some of the colors around so that I get it nice and balanced. Now I've got it all laid out, but before I do anything else, I'm going to take a picture of it because it's fairly easy once you start sewing to get some of these switched around and in the wrong order. And if I take a picture, I can always refer back and make sure I've got everything in its proper placement. I've turned all of my bottom row here so that the reverse side is showing. Now, sometimes it's hard to tell on a batik what's the right and what's the wrong side. If you can't tell, it really doesn't matter. So let's take the first piece here, and we're going to want to make a mark from this corner 2.5 inches down. So I'm going to measure down 2.5 inches here and put a little dot, and then I'm going to move my ruler and I'm going to draw a line, and I'm just using a pencil. If you have dark fabrics, you may want to use a chalk pencil, and I'm just going to draw a light line from the dot to the corner. Now the next piece, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to draw in the opposite direction. So we're going to keep going opposite all the way down the row here. Okay, so the first row is marked here, and we're ready to start sewing. So we are going to take this piece, spin it here, and you can pin it if you like. You can use a little glue in here if you like. And let's take it to the sewing machine. Even though my pieces are pinned together, I usually double check that everything is exactly lined up, those raw edges exactly lined up before I stitch. Now I'm going to stitch on the pencil line or slightly towards the corner there. Now when we open this up, it should make one long strip. And so I will sew a couple and make sure they look nice and straight. There's kind of a knack to it, but if you go right along that pencil or just inside there, they will line up perfectly. Now we're going to use the same procedure on these two pieces, but the line's going the opposite direction. So we're going to spin this way and again stitch right down the line. Now this one is going to go right there. Now these seam allowances, or these extra parts, they're facing down. So on this one, you want all the extra stuff facing up. So continue making these pairs and alternate each time which way the seam allowance is going to lay. There's the whole first row, it's all done, but before we move on, we're going to want to take these over to the ironing board and just give it a quick pressing, and then trim off that extra part back here so you leave just a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've gone ahead and used the same procedure that I used on these fabrics to make the top part of the placemat here. Now we are ready to sew each of these into a row. So I'm going to pick these up in order and I'm going to take them to the machine. So I've got them almost overlapping completely, but I can see what order I started in. So this one's going to be over on the left and we're going to end with this on the right. Now, since we ironed our seam allowances in opposite directions when we put these together, these two, which are going to go right next to themselves here, one of the seam allowances is going to be facing down and the back one is facing up. So these will meet right here, but there won't be any extra lumpiness, and we can make it really flat, and it's very easy to match the intersection. So I'm going to line up these top two corners. Now I'm going to take these corners down here, make them match, and then I can feel with my fingers here if these seams are lined up. You can just feel if it's nice and flat, they're not overlapping, there's no gap, and they're exactly the same length. Now we are going to finger press this seam allowance to the right. See how those meet very nicely there? Now we're going to take the third piece off of the stack here. And again, those seam allowances are going in opposite directions, making it very easy to stitch them together. The first row is all stitched together and all ironed nice and flat. And I went ahead and did the second row. And since the first row had seam allowances going to the right, I pressed these seam allowances to the left. Now all we have to do is stitch these two rows together, and the seam allowances are going in opposite directions, making it really easy to stitch. So the top is all done. Now let's go ahead and get the placemat finished. To finish the placemat, we're going to use a method I call the flip method. This works really well on small items and it does not involve binding it. So I'm using a piece of scrap batting. This is the same batting I use in my quilts. It's 80% cotton, 20% polyester. That goes down first. Then we're going to put our backing, and the backing is right side up. So I've got the reverse of it down, the right side up. And then I'm going to take my placemat and put it right side down. So I've got right sides together, and we're going to put a couple of pins around the edges here. Now I'm going to stitch this front to back, 1/4 inch in from that raw edge there. And I'm going to start right beyond this patchwork. I'm going to back tack, and I'm going to pivot when I get to the corner. And I'm going to go almost all the way around, but we're going to leave an opening. This is the last corner here. So I'm going to pivot, and then I'm going to stitch right beyond this here, and I'm going to back tack. And so this will leave us a nice opening that we can turn it right side out with. But before I do that, when I go to flip this, this seam might come apart. So I'm going to do what's called stay stitching. I'm just going to stitch really close to the edge, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And that will keep that seam from coming apart when I flip it. Now we want to trim off the excess backing and batting. So you can either use your scissors and just cut it like that, or if you've got your blade handy, you can trim it like this. And once you get all the sides trimmed off, you're also going to want to take off a little bit of this bulk in the corner so you can get a nice pointy corner. So close to the stitching, but don't trim through your stitching. Now we're ready to flip it right side out. So just put your hand between the top and the back, all the way to the far end, and just go ahead and pull it right side out. Then put one hand back in and poke out your corners. Now I'm usually fairly successful with my fingernails, but you can also use a chopstick, or there's some pointy tools. You can use a knitting needle, something to get your corner nice and square. Now we're going to want to flatten it out. Now I find this easiest. I press a little from the front. Now flip it over and just hand press with, you know, your palms have some heat in them, and you can press and make it nice and flat all along these edges here, and it helps if you do it from the back. Try to get that seam so it's right in the middle there, not riding up on the back or on the front, right in the middle. Now we're ready to quilt it. The first thing we're going to want to do is seal up this opening here, and I find it easier to do it from the back side. So I'm going to turn this in at about 1/4 inch. I'm just going to finger press it a little bit, and then I'm going to put some pins all along here. And I'm going to turn the back in 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to stick some pins all the way through here, pin that opening closed. Now I'm going to stitch this closed on the machine about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And I'm going to go all the way around the placemat like that. So right now it's closing up the opening, but I'm going to keep stitching all the way around, and that way you won't even really be able to tell where the opening is, and the placemat will have a nice knife edge. And this is a lot easier to stitch from the back side, so I always stitch this first edge stitching from the back. Now the opening is closed and it's edge stitched. Now we're going to flip it over and do a little quilting from the top side. I'm going to quilt my placemat in the ditch, and I'm only going to go all the way down the middle, and then I'm going to go right along the peaks and valleys here. And there's a really strong ditch here, so all my seam allowances are facing that way. So this is pretty easy to quilt here. So I am going to back tack at the beginning, and then my needle is in the ditch, and it's really to the left of this seam here. It's pretty easy. Now quilting along these lines, that's going to be even easier because we are on the bias. It's always easier to quilt on the bias. So I'm not even going to pin it. I'm just going to start sewing because nothing's really going to move. And you can feel this is the lower part, this is the higher part because the seam allowance is going that way. So my needle is right to the left of it. And when you get there, you're going to want to put your needle in and pivot and go down here. I've got all 4 placemats done, and I'm calling these peaks and valleys because the shape of the pattern, it's going up and down on both ends. So all 4 of the tops were made with the 20 jelly roll pieces. And for the backing, I used 1 yard. 1 yard did the back of all 4. It's a really fun project, and it wasn't very hard. They came out nice and flat. The method that I used just makes them come out nice and flat, which is what I like on my table. We hope you enjoyed our tutorial today on how to make the patchwork placemats. Now, we're going to have another giveaway. This is a log cabin quilt. This is made with a fabric collection from Cotton and Steel, and it's called Homebody. It has deep blues and rusts. Now the quilting pattern has got some retro looking flowers on it here. It's real easy to enter the giveaway. All you have to do is click the link right below the video. It says giveaway, and put in your name and your email address, and you might be the lucky winner. Now, if you don't want to miss any of our upcoming tutorials, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Happy quilting!